As the clock ticks closer to midnight at a glamorous New Year's Eve party, one woman stands poised to drop a bombshell that will shatter the room. A missing earring, a mysterious hotel key, and a husband with too many secrets. But what starts as a scandalous affair spirals into something much darker and far more dangerous. You won't believe how this New Year's countdown ends. Stay tuned for the explosive true story that left everyone speechless. The evening began like a scene from a dream. Soft, golden lights spilled across the polished marble floors, reflecting the glitter of champagne flutes and sequined dresses. Emma floated through the grand room, greeting guests with a practiced grace that came from years of hosting these events. Her laughter was light, her smile genuine, at least it seemed that way. Beneath her poised demeanor, a storm brewed. She had found it barely an hour ago while fumbling through Mark's jacket for the valet ticket. A small earring, silver with an unmistakable ruby centerpiece. It was delicate and elegant, the kind of thing Emma would have chosen for herself. But it wasn't hers. A cold knot formed in her stomach as she held it up to the light. The voices of the caterers bustling in the kitchen had faded. She stood frozen until the faint sound of Mark's footsteps jolted her back to the present. Slipping the earring into her pocket, she quickly smoothed her expression, her mind already racing. Now, as Mark laughed with a group of colleagues by the bar, Emma found herself watching him more closely. There he was, her husband of 15 years, confident and charming. His laughter rang out, a little too loud perhaps, or maybe it was her imagination. She shook off the thought, turning her attention to Sophie, who approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Everything all right?" Sophie's tone was casual, but her eyes, sharp and perceptive, lingered on Emma's face. Emma hesitated, debating whether to say anything. "Just the usual party jitters," she said with a practiced smile, but Sophie's brow furrowed slightly. Emma's closest friend since college, Sophie knew her too well to be easily fooled. Emma's focus returned to Mark, who had moved closer to the fireplace, his back turned. A woman stood near him now, someone Emma didn't recognize immediately. She was striking, with auburn hair that caught the light, and a red dress that fit her like a second skin. Mark leaned in to say something, and the woman's laughter followed, a low, melodic sound that seemed to cut through the chatter of the room. "Who's that?" Emma asked, trying to sound casual as she gestured toward the woman. Sophie followed her gaze. "That's Nicole," she said. "She's new." Her pause was deliberate, her voice laced with unspoken caution. "Mark's mentioned her, hasn't he?" Emma shook her head, the knot in her stomach tightening. "No," she replied, her voice soft. Sophie didn't press further, but her silence was telling. Emma felt her pulse quicken as she sipped her champagne, using the glass as a shield. Her mind raced, connecting fragments of the past few weeks, the late nights at the office, the vague excuses about meetings, the faint smell of a perfume she didn't own lingering on Mark's shirt one evening. She had brushed it off then, dismissing her instincts. But now... Mark turned back toward the room, his eyes scanning the crowd. They landed on Emma, and he smiled, raising his glass in her direction. She returned the gesture, her lips curving upward, but her chest felt heavy. She watched as Nicole drifted away, her figure disappearing into the throng of guests, and Mark resumed his conversation as though nothing had happened. Sophie's hand touched her arm lightly. "You sure you're okay?" Emma forced herself to nod. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Sophie's gaze lingered for a moment longer before she excused herself to greet another guest. Emma stood alone, gripping her glass, the room spinning in slow motion. Every laugh, every clink of a glass, every burst of conversation seemed louder, sharper, as though the walls were closing in. It was then she made her decision. She wasn't imagining things. Something was wrong, and tonight she would find out exactly what. Emma's resolve sharpened as the evening wore on. The warm glow of the party lights now felt stifling, a veneer hiding shadows she could no longer ignore. She moved gracefully through the crowd, smiling at guests, exchanging pleasantries, but her mind was elsewhere. Each time her eyes found Mark, she analyzed his every move. His charm seemed effortless, his laughter genuine, but to Emma it was an elaborate performance. The caterers wheeled out trays of hors d'oeuvres, and a live band played a soft jazz tune that floated through the air. Emma caught Sophie's eye from across the room, a silent exchange passing between them. Sophie was worried, Emma could tell, but now wasn't the time to share more. Not yet. She would need proof, something tangible before confronting Mark or Nicole. She wandered toward the hallway near the coat room, seeking a brief reprieve. The party noise faded slightly, replaced by the muffled hum of distant conversations. It was there, in the quieter space, that Emma spotted Mark's jacket hanging over a chair. Her heart pounded as she approached it, her hand trembling slightly. She slipped her fingers into the pocket where she had found the earring earlier. This time she discovered something new, a folded receipt. Pulling it out carefully, she scanned the details. It was from a luxury hotel, dated 2 weeks ago. Dinner for two. Her chest tightened as she stared at the familiar name of a restaurant Mark had once promised to take her to, but never had. The receipt felt heavier than paper in her hand, a confirmation of what she had feared. She tucked it into her clutch and straightened as she heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, Emma turned, her face composed, just as Mark appeared at the end of the hallway. His expression shifted from surprise to a smile when he saw her. "There you are," he said, his voice warm. "I was wondering where you went." "I needed some air," she replied smoothly. "The party's a bit overwhelming." He stepped closer, studying her with an almost imperceptible hesitation. "You've been quiet tonight. Is everything okay?" Emma smiled, a mask that felt more fragile with each passing second. "Of course, just a lot on my mind with the new year coming up." Mark nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. "New year, new beginnings," he said, his words heavy with something unspoken. "Let's head back to the party. People are starting to ask for you." She let him guide her back toward the main room, her thoughts racing. "New beginnings," he'd said. The irony of the statement twisted in her chest. Her grip on the receipt in her clutch tightened as she rejoined the crowd, her mind set on her next step. Emma's attention shifted to Nicole, who was now seated near the bar, chatting with a small group of guests. She seemed perfectly at ease, laughing at a man's joke, her hand brushing lightly against her wineglass. Emma's stomach churned as she watched the way Nicole carried herself, confident, magnetic, and entirely too comfortable at this party. Sophie appeared by her side, offering a fresh glass of champagne. "You're looking pale," she said softly. "Do you need a moment?" Emma glanced around to make sure Mark wasn't within earshot. "Not here," she whispered. "Later." Sophie nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "You know where to find me." As Sophie walked away, Emma spotted something that made her blood run cold. Nicole's purse sat open on the bar, and peeking out from its edge was a glimmer of silver and ruby. It was unmistakable. The earring. Her earring. The room seemed to tilt slightly as Emma steadied herself against the edge of a nearby table. She clenched her jaw, her resolve hardening. Nicole wasn't just a passing acquaintance. She was a thread in a web that Emma was determined to unravel. But if she was going to confront anyone, she needed more. Much more. For now, Emma retreated into the crowd, her mind buzzing with plans. Midnight was still hours away, and she intended to use every second to uncover the truth. The minutes ticked by, each one heavier than the last. Emma moved through the party like a ghost, her senses hyper-focused on the details she might otherwise have overlooked. Mark was back to mingling, his glass in hand as he entertained a group of executives near the grand piano. Nicole had drifted into another circle of guests, her laughter rising above the chatter like a mocking taunt. Emma's grip on her clutch tightened, the receipt inside a burning reminder of her mission. Emma found Sophie by the kitchen, away from the main party. Sophie was scanning the food trays with disinterest, her face a mask of polite disconnection until she saw Emma. Her brows furrowed immediately. "Tell me," Sophie said, her voice low but firm. Emma glanced over her shoulder, ensuring no one was within earshot. "It's worse than I thought," she whispered. She retrieved the hotel receipt and handed it to Sophie, who unfolded it quickly, her eyes narrowing as she read. "Dinner for two at the Magnolia?" Sophie's voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "That's not exactly a casual work meeting." Emma's throat tightened. "There's more. Nicole has an earring, the match to the one I found in Mark's jacket. I saw it in her purse." Sophie let out a sharp breath, her gaze hardening. "Emma, you can't let this go." "I'm not," Emma said, her voice steely. "But I need proof, something undeniable. If I confront them now, they'll twist it into something else." Sophie nodded, her mind already working. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to keep Mark occupied," Emma said. "I'm going to check Nicole's purse. If she's careless enough to bring that earring here, maybe there's more." Sophie hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "I'll distract him. Be careful." Emma slipped back into the party, her pulse quickening. Nicole's purse was still sitting on the bar, its contents slightly visible under the soft glow of the overhead lights. Emma glanced around, her heart hammering as she approached. Most of the guests were preoccupied with the band, the music drawing their attention away. She stood near the bar, pretending to examine the selection of wines. When she was sure no one was looking, she reached into the purse, her fingers brushing against the smooth fabric inside. Her hand closed around something cold and metallic. She pulled it out, a small key. It was engraved with the name of the Magnolia Hotel and a room number, 214. Emma's breath caught. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Before she could think further, a voice broke through her thoughts. "Lose something?" Emma's head snapped up. Nicole was standing a few feet away, her lips curved in a faint smile, her eyes sharp and calculating. For a moment, Emma felt the blood drain from her face, but she quickly regained her composure. "Oh, I thought this was my bag," Emma said lightly, slipping the key into her clutch. "So many purses look alike." Nicole's smile didn't waver, but her gaze lingered on Emma a moment too long. "Understandable," she said. Her tone was sweet, but the edge was unmistakable. "It's easy to lose track of things at parties like this." Emma forced a laugh, her pulse racing. "Isn't it just?" she said, stepping away as casually as she could manage. Her back was straight, her pace measured, but inside her mind was spiraling. Nicole knew something, maybe everything. She needed to act quickly. Midnight was drawing closer, and the weight of what she'd found threatened to crush her. For now, though, she needed to appear calm. No one could know what was brewing beneath the surface. Not yet. Not until she was ready to strike. Emma retreated to a quieter corner of the house, her heart pounding as she clutched the key in her hand. It felt like holding a live wire, buzzing with the weight of what it represented. Room 214, a name she'd heard only in whispers, now solidified in cold metal. What had Mark and Nicole done in that room? The answer gnawed at her, but she shoved it aside. There would be time for that later. For now, she needed a plan. The din of the party seemed far away, as Emma stood against the wall, scanning the room. Mark was near the band now, casually laughing with a group of co-workers. Sophie had already slipped into action, sidling up to him with a playful nudge and engaging him in conversation. Emma silently thanked her friend and let her focus shift back to Nicole. The other woman hadn't gone far. She was seated at the bar again, her body language too poised, her eyes occasionally darting across the room as if she were watching for something or someone. Emma wondered how much Nicole suspected. Did she know Emma had taken the key? Did she care? Nicole exuded the kind of confidence that came with secrets, a belief that she had the upper hand. Emma intended to change that. Drawing a steadying breath, Emma made her way to the powder room. The door clicked softly behind her, muffling the hum of the party. She leaned against the marble countertop, her reflection staring back at her from the ornate mirror. Her face was pale but determined, her eyes sharper than they'd been in years. Slowly, she unfolded the hotel receipt and placed it next to the key on the counter. They were pieces of a puzzle she wasn't ready to solve but couldn't ignore. Flashes of the past weeks flooded her mind. Mark's excuses, the way he avoided eye contact when she asked about his long nights, the new cologne she hadn't bought him. Every detail clicked into place with a sickening certainty. This wasn't just a slip or a mistake. This was deliberate, calculated, and yet there was something deeper. The key, the earring, the receipt. It all felt like the tip of something darker, something Mark wasn't just hiding from her, but from everyone. A knock on the door startled her, and she quickly stuffed the items back into her clutch. Opening the door, she found Sophie waiting, her expression grave. "Mark's asking for you," Sophie said quietly. "I think he's starting to notice you're avoiding him." Emma's pulse quickened. "Did he say anything?" "Not directly, but he's watching you," Sophie said. "And Nicole." They've exchanged a few glances. Emma felt a flicker of fear, but buried it under a wave of resolve. "Good," she said. "Let him wonder." Sophie's brows knitted together. "What are you planning, Emma?" "I don't know yet," Emma admitted. "But I need you to trust me." Sophie sighed but nodded. "I always do." Emma stepped out of the powder room, straightening her posture as she re-entered the chaos of the party. The noise hit her like a wave, but she pushed through it, her eyes scanning for her next move. Mark was still occupied with Sophie's earlier distraction, giving Emma the perfect opportunity. She made her way toward Nicole, weaving through clusters of guests, each step steady and deliberate. "Enjoying yourself?" Emma said as she reached Nicole's side, her tone light but laced with steel. Nicole turned, her smile as sharp as glass. "I am. You throw a beautiful party." Emma leaned against the bar, her voice dropping slightly. "You seem awfully comfortable here, almost as if you've been here before." Nicole's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of something unreadable passing over her face. "I'm not sure what you mean." Emma tilted her head, her own smile unwavering. "You know exactly what I mean." There was a beat of silence, the tension crackling between them. Nicole broke it with a soft laugh, but it lacked the ease of her earlier demeanor. "You're quite bold, Emma. I can see why Mark speaks so highly of you." The mention of Mark's name sent a fresh wave of anger through Emma, but she kept her composure. "Oh, I'm sure he does. We've been together a long time. A lot of history. A lot of trust." Nicole's eyes darkened slightly, the corners of her lips twitching as though she wanted to respond but thought better of it. Emma took the opportunity to press further. "It's funny," Emma continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I found something earlier, an earring, a beautiful piece, silver with a ruby centerpiece. Do you know it?" Nicole's expression froze for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Emma saw it. The recognition, the fear. Nicole recovered quickly, her smile returning, but the damage was done. "An earring, you say?" Nicole replied smoothly. "I can't say I know anything about it." Emma leaned closer, her smile turning cold. "I think you do." Before Nicole could respond, the sound of a glass breaking nearby interrupted them, drawing the attention of the room. Emma straightened, her heart pounding as Nicole took the opportunity to slip away, her movements deliberate but not hurried. Emma let her go, knowing she'd rattled her enough for now. The countdown to midnight was drawing closer, the energy in the room shifting as guests grew more animated. Emma felt the weight of her discoveries pressing down on her, but she didn't falter. She had what she needed to confront them both. Now she just needed the perfect moment. Midnight, she decided, would be the time for revelations. One way or another, this charade would end. The air buzzed with anticipation as the countdown to midnight loomed nearer. The band shifted gears, playing an upbeat tune that had guests swaying to the rhythm. Laughter and conversation filled the room, but for Emma it was all distant noise. Her focus was razor-sharp, her nerves electric. Midnight was no longer a celebration, it was a deadline. Emma kept her distance from Mark, who was now engrossed in a conversation with two executives by the piano. His smile was charming, his gestures animated. To anyone watching, he looked like the perfect host. But Emma saw the cracks, the way his eyes flicked toward her when he thought she wasn't looking, the slight stiffness in his posture. He was nervous, and that meant he knew something was wrong. Nicole, on the other hand, was harder to read. She had returned to the bar, her composure regained, chatting casually with a small group of guests. Emma noted how her laughter seemed forced now, how her gaze occasionally darted toward Mark. They were connected, but Emma still didn't know how deeply. The key in her clutch felt like a ticking bomb, a secret begging to be exposed. Emma moved toward Sophie, who was stationed near the appetizers, keeping a watchful eye on both Mark and Nicole. Sophie turned as Emma approached, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "You've shaken her," Sophie said, nodding subtly toward Nicole. "She's trying too hard to act normal." "Good," Emma said, her voice low, "but it's not enough. I need more." "What are you going to do?" Sophie asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. Emma hesitated, glancing around the room. "I'm going to make them both uncomfortable, see if they crack." "Emma, be careful," Sophie warned. "If you push too hard—" "I know what I'm doing," Emma interrupted, her voice firm. "Trust me." Emma stepped away before Sophie could protest further, her eyes locking onto Nicole. She crossed the room with purpose, weaving through clusters of guests until she was standing just a few feet away from her target. Nicole glanced up, her expression briefly faltering before she recovered with a tight smile. "Emma," Nicole said, her tone polite but guarded, "having a good time?" "Oh, I always enjoy these parties," Emma replied smoothly, her voice carrying just enough edge to make Nicole's smile waver. "Though it's interesting, seeing how some people mingle as if they belong." Nicole's eyes narrowed slightly, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the tension beneath. "What are you implying?" Emma leaned in, her voice dropping. "You've made yourself quite comfortable tonight, almost as if you're not a guest at all." Nicole stiffened, her hand tightening around her glass. "I don't think I appreciate your tone." Emma smirked, leaning back just enough to give Nicole the illusion of space. "I'm sure you don't, but that's the thing about the truth. It doesn't care who appreciates it." Before Nicole could respond, Mark's voice cut through the tension. "Emma, there you are." Emma turned to see him approaching, his smile too wide, his steps too deliberate. He had been watching, and now he was inserting himself. It was exactly what Emma wanted. "Mark," she said brightly, her voice a touch too cheerful. "I was just getting to know Nicole. She's quite the conversationalist." Nicole shot Emma a glare before plastering on a smile of her own. "Mark and I were just discussing that earlier. He's told me so much about you." "Oh, I'm sure he has." Emma replied, her words dripping with subtle venom. Mark's always been so generous with his stories. Of course, they're not always entirely accurate. Mark's smile faltered, his gaze darting between the two women. Emma, can I talk to you for a moment? Privately. Emma arched an eyebrow, pretending to consider his request. Of course, she said finally, her tone sweet but firm. Let's step outside. I could use some fresh air. Mark nodded, clearly eager to remove her from Nicole's orbit. Emma followed him toward the patio doors, her heart pounding as they stepped into the crisp night air. The chatter of the party faded behind them, leaving only the sound of distant fireworks popping in the sky. What's going on, Emma? Mark asked, his voice low but tense. You've been acting strange all night. Emma turned to face him, her expression calm but unreadable. Strange? I wouldn't say that. Observant, maybe. Curious. Definitely. Mark's jaw tightened. If there's something you want to say, just say it. Emma stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. Oh, I have plenty to say, Mark. But I think you already know most of it. For a moment he didn't respond, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. Emma saw the flicker of guilt, the flash of fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the sound of the patio doors opening behind them interrupted. Emma turned to see Nicole stepping outside, her face pale but defiant. Well, Emma said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. This should be interesting. The three of them stood in silence, the tension thick as the fireworks in the distance lit up the sky. Midnight was approaching, and Emma knew the moment of truth was near. She had both of them exactly where she wanted them. The silence on the patio was deafening, broken only by the faint crackle of fireworks in the distance. Emma stood between Mark and Nicole, her heart pounding as she felt the weight of their unease pressing down on her. The crisp night air carried a tension so sharp it could have cut glass. Nicole shifted uncomfortably, her confident veneer crumbling under Emma's gaze. Mark, for his part, stood frozen, his eyes darting between the two women. It was the first time Emma had seen him unsure, and it sent a cold thrill through her. Well, Emma began, her voice calm but laced with ice, it seems like we're all here now. How convenient. Nicole opened her mouth to speak, but Emma cut her off with a raised hand. No, Nicole, you've had plenty of time to talk, I'm sure. Now it's my turn. Mark stepped forward, his voice low and urgent. Emma, this isn't the time or the place. Emma's sharp laugh sliced through his words. Oh, isn't it? At my party, in my home, seems like the perfect place to me. Mark flinched but said nothing. Emma took a step closer to him, her gaze unwavering. Tell me, Mark, how long has this been going on? Weeks? Months? Or is it years? Nicole's face drained of color, her composure slipping entirely. Emma, you don't understand. Don't I? Emma snapped, her voice rising. She turned to Nicole, her expression a mix of fury and bitter amusement. You think I don't understand? Let me tell you what I understand. I understand that I found your earring in my husband's jacket. I understand that you've been parading around this party like you own the place. And I understand that this, she gestured between Nicole and Mark, has been happening under my nose for far too long. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his usual calm shattered. Emma, please, don't you dare ask me to calm down, Emma hissed. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the hotel key, holding it up like a weapon. Room 214, Magnolia Hotel. Care to explain that? Mark's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing as if the words had been stolen from him. Nicole took a step back, her eyes darting toward the door as if calculating her escape. Emma's voice dropped, cold and cutting. No, nothing to say. Then let me fill in the blanks for you. A romantic dinner, a private room. Tell me, was it worth it? Was she worth it? Mark finally found his voice, but it was shaky. Emma, It's not what you think. Emma's laugh was hollow, her anger blazing. It's exactly what I think, Mark. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. Nicole, finding a shred of courage, stepped forward. Emma, you need to hear him out. It's not— Don't, Emma said sharply, her eyes locking onto Nicole. You don't get to defend him. You don't get to speak at all. Nicole froze, her lips pressing into a thin line. The power shifted entirely to Emma, and she relished it. For the first time that night, she felt like she was in control. The sound of the patio doors opening again drew their attention. Sophie stepped outside, her expression unreadable. She glanced between the three of them, her eyes lingering on Emma. "Everything okay out here?" Sophie asked, her voice steady but carrying an edge of concern. Emma's lips curved into a bitter smile. "Oh, everything's just fine. Mark was about to tell me exactly how long he's been lying to me." Sophie stepped closer, her presence grounding Emma even as her anger threatened to spiral. Mark looked at Sophie, his expression pleading, but she crossed her arms, unmoved. "Emma," Mark began, his voice cracking, "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it's not what you think. Nicole and it was a lapse in judgment. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" Emma repeated, her voice rising. "Do you think that makes it better, that you threw away 15 years of marriage for something that didn't mean anything?" Mark looked stricken, but before he could answer, Nicole spoke up, her voice trembling. "It wasn't just a lapse, Mark. Stop lying to her." Emma turned to Nicole, her expression deadly. "What are you talking about?" Nicole swallowed hard, glancing at Mark before meeting Emma's gaze. "There's more. It wasn't just the affair. Mark's been using me to cover up something bigger." Mark's head snapped toward Nicole, his voice sharp. "Nicole, don't." Emma's heart thudded painfully as she stared at them. "What is she talking about, Mark?" Nicole hesitated, but the look in Emma's eyes seemed to embolden her. "The embezzlement," she said quietly. "Mark's been siphoning money from his company. He made me keep quiet. He said if I didn't, he'd ruin me." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emma's mind reeled, the weight of this new betrayal crashing over her. She turned to Mark, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that true?" Mark's face was ashen, his silence confirming everything. Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her world unraveling in ways she couldn't have imagined. The fireworks in the distance grew louder, a cruel celebration of the chaos that had just been unleashed. Emma straightened, her voice steady but cold. "You've destroyed everything, Mark. Not just our marriage, but everything we built. I hope it was worth it." Mark opened his mouth to respond, but Emma didn't wait to hear it. She turned and walked back inside, Sophie close behind her. The party was still in full swing, oblivious to the storm that had just erupted outside. But Emma knew one thing for certain. The night wasn't over, and neither was the reckoning. Emma moved through the party like a shadow, her expression calm, almost serene. But inside her emotions raged, a swirling mix of betrayal, fury, and a growing resolve. The revelations on the patio had stripped away the last of her naivety. This wasn't just about an affair, it was about layers of deceit, lies stacked so high that they threatened to suffocate her. But Emma wasn't going to crumble, not tonight. She found Sophie waiting near the kitchen, her face pale and worried. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked softly, her voice barely audible over the din of the party. Emma nodded, her jaw tight. "I'm fine," she said, her voice firm, "but this isn't over." Sophie hesitated, then leaned in closer. "What's the plan?" Emma glanced over her shoulder toward the patio doors. Nicole had returned inside, her expression stiff as she attempted to blend back into the crowd. Mark was nowhere to be seen, likely still outside, reeling from the confrontation. Emma's eyes narrowed. "We wait for midnight," Emma said, her voice steady. If they think this is the end, they're wrong. The clock above the fireplace ticked loudly, its hands inching closer to the final hour. Guests gathered in the living room, champagne glasses in hand, their laughter and cheers a sharp contrast to the storm brewing in Emma's chest. She drifted to the edge of the room, scanning the crowd, her eyes landing on Nicole. The other woman was speaking with a man Emma vaguely recognized as a business associate of Mark's, her smile strained. Emma's lips curved into a cold smile. Nicole was unraveling. "Emma," Sophie said cautiously, pulling her attention back, "if you're going to do something, make sure it's worth it." "Oh, it will be," Emma replied, her voice low. "Trust me." The minutes crept by, each one feeling longer than the last. At 5 minutes to midnight, Emma spotted Mark re-entering the house. His face was drawn, his steps heavy as he avoided her gaze and headed toward the bar. She watched as he poured himself a drink, downing it in one go before setting the glass down with a shaky hand. For the first time, she saw him not as the confident, untouchable man she'd married, but as a weak, desperate shell of himself. Emma felt no pity. The countdown began, the crowd shouting the numbers with growing excitement. Emma moved to the center of the room, her pulse steady, her mind clear. This was the moment. 10, 9, 8. The guests were buzzing with anticipation, their eyes on the clock as the final seconds ticked away. Emma caught Sophie's eye, giving her a small nod. Sophie stepped closer, her presence a quiet reassurance. 7, 6, 5. Mark and Nicole were now standing on opposite sides of the room, both trying to avoid Emma's gaze. They failed. 4, 3. Emma raised her glass, her voice cutting through the noise. "Everyone, a toast." The room quieted, the countdown faltering as heads turned toward her. Emma's smile was serene, her eyes sharp as she looked around the room. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice clear and steady, "and to the truth, because sometimes the truth has a funny way of coming out." The room was silent, the weight of Emma's words settling over the crowd. Mark froze, his glass halfway to his lips. Nicole paled, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of a nearby table. Emma let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing, her tone calm but laced with steel. "For years, I've been lucky enough to share this home and this life with all of you," she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But tonight, I learned something interesting, something shocking even, and I think it's only fair to share." The murmurs began, guests exchanging confused glances. Emma's eyes locked on Mark, her smile tightening. "Mark," she said, her voice sharp, "would you like to explain why there's a hotel receipt for dinner for two in your jacket pocket? Or why Nicole seems to have an earring that matches the one I found there?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, eyes darting between Mark and Nicole. Mark's face turned ashen, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form words. Nicole stepped forward, her expression panicked. "Emma, this isn't the place," Mark began weakly, his voice shaking. "Oh, I think it's exactly the place," Emma snapped, her voice rising, "because these people deserve to know who they're toasting tonight. A liar, a cheat, and, as it turns out, a thief." More gasps. Sophie moved closer, her presence steadying Emma as the guests murmured louder. Mark's face twisted, anger replacing his panic. "Emma, stop this," he said, his voice hardening. "You don't understand." "No," Emma interrupted, her voice slicing through his. "I understand perfectly. Nicole wasn't just your mistress. She was your accomplice. The embezzlement, Mark. You've been stealing from your own company, using her to cover your tracks. Isn't that right?" Nicole's face crumpled, her composure completely shattered. "I didn't have a choice," she blurted, her voice trembling. "He threatened me." The room erupted into chaos, guests whispering furiously, their eyes wide with shock. Mark turned on Nicole, his expression livid. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I'm done lying for you," Nicole shouted, her voice rising above the din. "I'm done covering for you." Emma stepped back, her work complete. She watched as the carefully constructed facade of her husband's life crumbled before her eyes. Sophie placed a comforting hand on her arm, but Emma didn't move, her gaze steady as Mark and Nicole turned on each other. The sound of sirens pierced the night, and the room fell silent again. Sophie leaned in, her voice low. "Did you?" Emma nodded, her smile faint but resolute. "I called them before I came back inside." The front door burst open, and two uniformed officers stepped into the room. "Mark Harrington," one of them called out. Mark's shoulders slumped, defeat washing over him as the officers approached. He didn't resist as they cuffed him, his head hanging low. Nicole shrank into the background, her face streaked with tears. Emma stood tall, her eyes following Mark as he was led out of the house. The guests watched in stunned silence, their shock palpable. When the door closed behind the officers, Emma turned to face the room. "Happy New Year," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of triumph and sadness. The crowd remained frozen, unsure of how to respond. Emma didn't wait. She set her glass down on a nearby table, walking toward the stairs with Sophie by her side. The weight of the night pressed down on her, but she felt lighter somehow, her resolve carrying her forward. This wasn't the end, Emma knew. There would be fallout, questions, and pain. But it was the beginning of something else, something honest. And as she reached the top of the stairs, the sound of fireworks filling the air, she allowed herself to hope. The events of that fateful New Year's Eve party left everyone reeling, but for Emma, they marked the start of a journey toward reclaiming her life. The glittering facade of her marriage had been shattered, but in its place she found clarity. She realized that betrayal, while devastating, could also be a catalyst for growth and self-discovery. Emma refused to let her husband's deceit define her future. Instead, she focused on rebuilding, stronger, wiser, and more resilient. For those who witnessed the unraveling of Mark's secrets, the night served as a stark reminder of the dangers of deception. Lies, no matter how carefully crafted, have a way of surfacing, often at the most unexpected moments. The truth, though painful, carries with it a unique power, the ability to free, to heal, and to rebuild what's been broken. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about courage. It's about finding the strength to confront hard truths and refusing to let fear dictate your choices. Emma's bravery in exposing the lies taught everyone that sometimes the most difficult path is the one worth taking. In the end, honesty and integrity shine brighter than any glittering celebration.